everybody. I'm Jennifer Harper, and I'm the owner of Harper Printmaking Studio. And we've been going now for, well, I've been in the studio for about 12 years, but we've been a sharing studio for about 7 years. And I've been here at the Hub for closing in on 2 years. And I've done a few workshops here. I've demonstrated here several times. And I'll be teaching more workshops as the world gets a little more normal. Not in just a few months, I'll be doing some more workshops and whatnot. So, starting out, what we do at my studio, I thought it'd be a good idea to just kind of do an overview of most of the processes that we do at the studio. And I kind of focus in on, it's all relief, 90% of it's relief, let's say that. So hence the title, All Kinds of Relief. Wood cut and lino cut are like my specialties, and the third one being, monoprint. So this is going to happen throughout the talk because this is my thing. All right. So, and that's why I have this thing to go by. And everybody should have a little piece of paper in their seat that is a print. It's a little part of a print, and it tells you immediately what a relief print is because there's texture. If it's a relief print, there is texture. Monoprint, no, but a relief print, yes. Okay? And that's what I'm very attracted to, the fact that I have to carve to get the print, at least with wood cut and lino cut. And so I'm going to move on through. If you have a chance to read these bullet points, if you have any questions, feel free to ask me. I'm very happy to do that. Block printing. We've all heard of block printing before. Some people will say it's like rubber stamping. Yes, it's like rubber stamping. All of the images, whatever you draw, you're going to get the opposite. Once you transfer to the block, you're going to get the opposite thing. So if you want it to look just like what you've drawn, you have to flip it on your block to get the thing that you do to start with. It's kind of confusing, but I'm left-handed and I think backwards anyway. Everything I do is backwards. I start a magazine from the back to the front. So all backwards stuff kind of comes naturally to me. So anyway, if you're ready, I'm going to go on to the next screen. So talking a little bit about traditional woodcut linoleum. We run the gambit in the studio, and something that we all like to do and we get excited about every year is we do print exchanges. And this is the one I just did for a print exchange, and I just put it, it's in the gallery now. It's a little wood cut, and actually this is the plate right here. And the whole idea of a print exchange is kind of the old school way of doing an edition. An edition is where you do any number of prints, but they all have to be as absolutely the same as you can possibly make them. So you're trying to use the same color of ink each time, same amount of ink, you know, you're using the same plate because, well, that's how printmaking started. That's what they did. So it's a good thing to do as a printmaker now, just so you can kind of standardize yourself and you know, yes, I can do that, but for me, that gets boring really fast. I like to do a few like that, and then Donna likes to do a few one way and then change up the ink, and we change up the paper and all that, and that, we'll get into that, is what a variable addition is. That's the next one. So you can see slight changes. It's the same substrate or matrix or whatever you want to call it, but the yellow background is in two of them. There is no yellow background in the third one. That's a little reduction plate, but that would be called, put a little VE down on that. So it's part of a set edition, but it changes. Okay? Okay. For me, the whole pursuit of printmaking has been figure out how I'm supposed to do it and then figure out how I can change it. Because otherwise I just would have moved on to something else by now. But the fact that I can keep changing the way I make a print and flip it around and just rethink it, that makes it interesting. So With this, I have the little blocks with me. You can see it's the same block and the same size, and each one's just been carved slightly differently. So you can apply different colors of ink, and you can just keep, I did a whole series with this one. I think I ended up doing 6 or 8 pieces. They're all just constructed out of moving and changing the colors on this. And I've done some, I did some figural pieces. I did one with my daughter where the same idea where I just took the blocks, kind of breaking the idea of having a boundary, that, you know, what you expect, the boundary that you expect. And if I'm going too fast, I'll stop. Okay, a little more about woodcut. We work in all sizes in the studio and outside of the studio. Most people like to work, they're comfortable with 4x6, 6x8, but then we've kind of gotten ourselves into this thing called little big print, where we carve larger plates. The background plate there is one that was used where that's actually printed with a steamroller. And we'll be doing that again in the fall. But most of our folks, me included, we kind of like to stick to things a little bit smaller. It's just, it's hard on the hands and whatnot to do the really big stuff. But, let's see. Okay, I think that's it for that. Okay, lino cut. We do an awful lot of lino cut. I do a lot of lino cut. And as you can see there, it's easy because you just cut the size of plate that you want. It's easier to carve. You're not worrying about, grain is always a consideration with woodcut, that you know, you've got to be careful you're not cutting across the grain, or if you do, you have to be very careful with lino cut. You just do what you want. It's a little bit softer, it's thinner. You can see a lino cut plate versus a woodcut plate, much thinner. And let's see. Again, it's easy to cut, like if you want to do a shape with it or something, you can do a shape. Now I wrote linseed is a material made of cork and linoleum, cork and linseed oil. I'm sure that there's more stuff in it now. Originally, that's what was in it. And this is called, this is Elephant Dreaming. And I just put that one in the gallery. Tools of the trade. This is a print I just finished. And it's just got everything under the sun that we use in the studio for relief printmaking. Okay, the carving tools. Did I get my carving tools out? I did not get my chisels out. But you know what? You can see the chisels. I'm not actually going to be doing any carving today, but I primarily use 3. If you just want to go down the list there. I made this little diagram just to clarify what each chisel does. And the more you look at the pieces and you get familiar with the carving, it just becomes really obvious what chisel you're using. The knife, when you've transferred your image onto a block, the first thing I do is I go over all my important lines with a knife. Because a knife it defines everything. If you don't have a set line to go by, then your chisel cuts will just be very, they won't have a stopping place. So that's why I made the little tiny diagram. TV will shut down soon. So yay. The top one you really can't see, and I did that on purpose. I opened up the cut just a little bit in a couple places, and that would be if you wanted to come back and show the opening, you can. But when you're first doing it, the cuts just define the lines, and you can see it well enough when you're carving to see what you're coming up to. Okay, brayers and rollers. I just brought one today. I'm going to show, when I get done with this part, I'm just going to quickly show you all how to do a hand print and a press print. So a lot of things would seem really obvious, but when you're printing, for each and every color, you've got to have a dry, clean brayer. You can't just go wash the brayer, come back, use a brayer, or you're going to have a horrible mess. You have to start with a fresh, dry brayer for each and every color, and a separate knife for each and every color. And a lot of times we'll print a color one day, and we'll come back and we'll print the next color the next day. A lot of times I'm impatient, and I just print color on color, but what happens then is some of the color comes up through, and sometimes you want that, and sometimes you don't. You know, I like to experiment and see what ink's going to do coming through. So again, back to the little big, that great big one is about this big, and I can barely pick it up, so we only use that when we're doing the really big prints. The ones that are 2 by 2, 2 by 3, that kind of thing. Okay, so you get a little bit of a picture of the studio, and I want it to be very easy for you to, your little sheet of paper there has a list. If you're just starting out and you want to have a little shopping list of what you would need to get started, that's there. And I'm going to show you, like as I said, I have the Baron that's there for you to see how that works. You just roll it over, and we'll do that in a minute. I'm going to get through with this slide. And we brought the little tiny, this isn't the tiniest press we have. We have one that's even tinier. I call it kind of the clown car press, but I don't even know if you'll be able to see that. It's so tiny, but it can do like little postcard size prints. In my studio we have 4 etching presses and a letter press, a Vandercook press. And when we're really busy and everybody doesn't have to wear a mask, it can get quite busy in there. But we've got people coming in dribs and drabs right now. Okay, when I say embossing, this is embossed. You know, you feel that. You know what embossing is. Okay, so inside of the woodcut, lino cut, these are processes, reduction printing. I do a lot of reduction printing. I really like working with one plate, and with that, you just keep carving away. When you first start carving, you're only carving, what you're going to see is white. Whatever color ink you have, your cuts are all going to be white. So you start with your lightest color. So like if you have yellow or you have a pale, there you can see in the background there's a pale yellow. You carve your whole edition for that color. And so you only can do a set, like say I wanted 20, I might make 23 or something, because I know I'm probably going to botch up a few of them. So I would do all the yellow, and then I carve that plate again. I go to the next darkest color, print all of those, and just so on and so forth. Just keep carving away. If I want to save that color, I have to carve it away, or the next color on the brayer is just going to make it go away, right? So I just like it because I never know what I'm going to get, and I don't know what's going to happen when my colors overlap and stuff. So it's challenging and it's fun, and I enjoy it. Multiple plate printing is something I've just kind of gotten started on fairly recently, in the last, I'd say 10 months or so, and it's kind of intermixed with the other techniques that I do. So I've only done a couple of them. I do enjoy it. I like the fact that you've got separate plates, and you can say, oh, I don't want the tulips to be this color, or this, the next time I can change it. And I could just keep making more if I want to, but I tend to not want to make more than where you can't go back with the reduction printing. And here you can see the plates. I don't know what I did with my yellow plate, but I put my drawing in, and you can see how the drawing's reversed to do the transfer. And then, you know, this is kind of an advanced process. It's not something you're going to do in a workshop here. At most, we might do a 2-color process, but it's really pretty fun, and it's fun to start playing with. Well, which layer do I want to print first? And do I want to print them wet on wet, or you know, all of that stuff to get changes and make it interesting. Here's Donna's. Now we've gone off of the processes that I teach the most and do the most to collograph. I include collograph because, again, you're using a raised plate and you're printing on the high stuff. So collograph, you're building up rather than carving. You're not digging in, you're building up. So you always have to be mindful while you're building up. You can do it with mat board or watercolor paper, or as Donna did with nuts and bolts and fabric and plastic and rope. And I mean, she got very inventive with this. This was a very fun print, and using all kinds of found materials. So this is where, you know, you can kind of get the crossover there, where it can be a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But at the end of the day, you have to have it smooth enough to run it through a press or stomp on it. That's another fun way to print, that you can get it all set up and then stomp it out. So, I've only done one collograph. I think maybe you've only done one collograph, Donna. I don't know. It's fun, but it's not our favorite. Chine Colle. Chine Colle, I have a 3 people that do this in the studio. I keep saying, I want to do it, I want to do it. I haven't done it yet. It's a beautiful technique where you are placing, you're actually gluing a colored paper between the base of the print and the ink. So the ink is pressing the paper and adhering the paper, so it really and truly is part and parcel of the print. You know, a lot of times, I think in the past, I had been looking at prints and thinking that was ink, and realized that's not ink, that's paper. It's Audrey's, this next one up here. You could look at that and just think that's ink, but it's not. It's a very thin piece of paper that she's applied underneath, and this is actually an etching. Now, I don't do etching in the studio. A couple of other people do etching, but it's beautiful. It's just a different process. People do the chemical aspect of the etching off-site, and then they come to the studio, because they are, after all, etching presses. That's what they're built for. Okay. And wood engraving. I have one wood engraving plate here. You can see it's very thick and it's really hard. The end grain is very obvious here. We use a different type of chisel for this. Little tiny chisels, and I'm sure I'm not using the right word right now, because this is Marvin's specialty, not mine. Marvin brought this to the studio as, hey guys, why don't we do this? And some of us embraced it and some didn't. It's kind of one of those things we're going to work towards. But he's done a beautiful job with it. Okay. I get a lot of enjoyment out of just kind of messing around and putting stuff together, and putting something that's carved together with something else that's carved would be a monoprint, because you're using something that's got a fixed carving on it, but you're moving it around on your paper and playing with it, and you're playing with the way you ink it. But when you're finished with that print, you can't make another print like that. here's the other element in that one too. So these could be moved around all over the place, and I was going to carve some more leaves and make some different ones, and I probably still will, but I like this, I like repeating a lot. Anybody who sees my work sees that I use a lot of the same elements in repeated fashion. Playing with your inks. I kind of mentioned that already. It's kind of a good segue into monoprint because, again, you're making each print individual. You can play with your inks whether you're using a something carved like this and just keep changing the backgrounds, or you can roll a color of ink on a separate block and keep changing that all day long, and then turn that around and carve that on top of it. And that's kind of a nice, it's almost, I think of almost kind of a cheater's way to get a quick second color without worrying too much about whether it's another carved plate. It's just fun. And you can keep, as I said, the glass, we've got a couple of nice big glass tables, so it's easy to just keep making a big mess and dirtying lots and lots of brayers and stuff and playing around. Mentioning extender, I've just kind of begun to really embrace extender as a way to make colors very transparent and overlap each other. Okay, shifting gears again. This is still relief, but this is styrene printing is a very great kind of introductory way to print. Bring this over here. You're printing, but you're not having to carve. You just can make little marks with a pencil or popsicle stick or something that you can. I used an old tracing wheel for some of this, and it's a lot of fun because you can chop the plates up. They're very thin, and I think that might be the next workshop I've got coming up. But I'm going to just walk you through this one real quick. This would be, I've just made the marks, I've just run uniform, the same color, printed it, okay? Take the same plate, here's the plate. Next one, I just didn't put any more ink here. And I put more ink here, printed it, okay? Then down here, I mean, you can tell as this progressively gets lighter, I'm not put any more here. The only places I've put more ink is where it's stronger. And then I said, well, let's see what happens when I put a little bit of color here. And let's see, 4, 5. Then I introduce an orange color, but I don't put it everywhere. And then the final one is a ghost print, taking the plate that still has ink on it and making the last print.
Oh.
So, can everybody see that well enough? Yeah. So this can easily be done in a workshop, and it's not an expensive material or anything like that. So let me do this before it buzzes out on me. Trying to do that again. Sorry. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, I got in a habit of doing monotypes. Now, a monotype doesn't use a fixed grid of any sort. It's just what you have is some kind of a plate. It can be plastic or glass. Well, not glass. Some kind of plastic, right? I have used ones that are pieces that after I've chopped up a frame, like I don't need all the plexi, then it gives me a nice panel that I can make a monoprint with. The nice thing about it is that we're being very green because we get done doing a bunch of prints with regular structured prints. Here we've got this ink. Well, I don't want to throw it out. It's not enough to do a whole lot with. I can make a monoprint, or I can make a monotype. I can do that before I close out the studio for the day. And sometimes I'm like, I'm done with doing the fixed thing, and I just want to, it's kind of my way of doodling, and sort of, it's as painterly as I can be, because I don't want to paint, but I like the play of what happens with these. You've got these leftover inks, and you just start kind of mucking about with them, and before you know it, this started out as something else. I did one print on the panel, which was a really silly kind of little stick figure thing. And then I saw there was some residual ink, and I just added some more ink. And this came out, and I was like, whoa, I like that. I really like that, you know? So it's just kind of the reward for you doing this one thing, and you're like, okay, I'm done with that for the day. Let me do this. And what you're doing is you lay the ink, or at least the way I do it. I roll the ink over, and then I just wipe it off in places, and I print that. I wipe the ink off, I apply another ink, and I keep doing that till I've got something I like. And this looks sort of brushy-like. I use my brayer a lot. I call it brayer painting. I just take my brayer and make all the marks I want. And that swoop along there is just where I lift the brayer while I'm making an arc. And I tend to do that with it. So I think it lets us just kind of loosen up a little bit and do something that's a little less structured. I'm not sure why the line's going through there, but it's probably a different program, but that's okay. So hopefully I'm almost done with this part. It's so funny that I had the title that I had for this, because I didn't know we were going to have a pandemic. I didn't know I wasn't going to hug my daughter since March. I wasn't going to, that the whole world was going to be wacko, I just said all kinds of relief, because in our studio, everybody comes in there and they're just like, ugh, I don't have to think about work. I don't have to think about whatever's happening. I'm just in here messing around. I'm having a good time. And I think all of us that are artists, really, that's important to us. And I've just started getting my folks back, in dribs and drabs, and it means the world to us to be able to make stuff and talk about it. And so I'm so happy to be here, where it's like, okay, we can kind of start to move around again and do things. And as I said here, I was like, well, what do you guys, tell me why it is you like to do this. And it was all the same stuff that I like. It's like, I love the smell of the ink. I love the way the rollers makes that sound. I like all these different things that we all like about it. But everybody said, I like being here because we're together, and we're talking about printmaking, and it matters to us, and we have other people. Printmakers are are rarer birds, I think, than painters and whatever. But we get into the whole process aspect of making print, and you kind of get addicted to it. Paper too. We all love paper. Somebody brings in a new paper, like, ooh, what you got? Let's see. Show us. Let me feel it. Let me smell it. So that's just the way we are. So anyway, I love doing it. I love watching other people do it. It's such a kick for me to watch, and I say this all the time, watching a new printer have the first thing come off the press. I'm just a little kid again, just like they are. And anybody that wants to come to my studio can come to my studio and use my presses. They're there. I'm one person. I only need one press. So we're sharing studio, and I'll be here teaching when I can. And so, anybody got questions? I hope you have questions. No?
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you, when you're deciding what you want to do, like you want to do a lino, say, or a woodcut,
Yes.
do you think of the image, or have an image in mind and then figure out how to carve it, or do you have the carving in mind and figure out what image you want? Like, do you know?
I kind of it's like, I kind of all goes hand in hand, but it's like just almost like a little spark. If I see something, and if it's something that's out there, I know immediately whether it'll make a good print again. I have a pretty good visual. I pretty well know what the print's gonna look like, maybe to 75% of it. But I'm really happy when and I'm usually surprised, not always pleasantly. I have I have files of prints that are never gonna leave my file, but I feel fortunate that I can visualize to an extent. It's very fun for me at this point in doing it, now that I've been doing it a while, that I don't worry about what stuff means anymore. I can sort of bring meaning into my process once I start with an image, especially if it's not just a set landscape or something. It builds meaning as I'm doing it because I'm thinking about things that are going on around me. And I've always made a lot of parallels to visual things and what I'm thinking about. If that makes any sense. I don't know, just yes, ma'am.
When you have an image you want to print,
Yes.
what makes you choose between the linoleum and the wood?
Okay, well, a couple of things. The wood, it's the limit, we're more limited with size with wood. And it's kind of more if the grain is important to me to that piece, like this little cherry piece, it's really hard and it has almost an etching quality to it. But if you look really closely, you can still see that grain, and when it prints, you can still see that grain. And that was important to that piece. If I have a piece that's more of an idea piece and it's bigger, I'm not going to find a really nice piece of what we call Sheena. This is Sheena plywood. To have a piece of Sheena the size of, say, 9 by 12 would just be prohibitively expensive. I mean, I can use MDF like for the really big ones, but it's kind of an awful thing to carve on. It's just kind of it's builder supply. You're carving on something that doesn't have this stuff's beautiful. It's like you like hearing your chisel go through it and stuff, but okay. And
The styrene, do you have a sample of that?
I actually thought that I did. This is styrene, and you can see how thin that is.
Oh, wow, okay.
And so, like I said, it's super easy to make dents on and to cut up. But for the same reason, you can make, you couldn't make a ton of prints with this like you could. It's not hard like lino or wood.
Right.
And you probably would not want to hand print with this because the little nubs on this would affect
Yes.
the paper. So you're better off with a press and get maybe 8 prints out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But it's so easy to do. You can just do something else. So I'm about to the point where if somebody wants to keep talking to me while I roll
There's
out
another
some
question.
ink. Oh, yes, dear.
I admit it. As an amateur woodworker, when I make things, I make a lot of mistakes. But because I make mistakes, I can then say, oh geez, I cut this short. I can just throw that one away or set it aside when I'm making something and use it later. But then I make a new piece, like making a frame or something. If I
Yeah.
screw up one corner, I'll make another one. But when I hear what you're talking about, reduction printing, if I were trying to do reduction printing, I know I would make mistakes, and that's what scares me the most about the idea of it. When I see it, it's like you described it as suicide printing, and that's exactly the way I would feel. But I remember one time, a few years ago, I saw this museum presentation where there was a Japanese printmaker, and I don't know the process name or any of that stuff, but he was doing some sort of wood cut, and he messed up one part of it, and he used, I think it was wax or something, to fix that part so he could get the same effect, and then he went on and did the rest of it. Is there such a thing in reduction printing that you do so that if you cut away something you didn't want to cut away, that you could put it back in place and say, oopsie, and then go on to the next?
Yeah. Yes and no. What I like to do is take a mistake and turn it into a positive, find a way around it. If I can't do it, I think in all this time, I think I've only tried to replace lino. No, lino is just, you're not gonna, but if I can find that little chip out of the 150,000 chips that are on my desk, and I can stick that guy back in there again with some glue. If it's a really critical one, like if it were around a facial feature or something like that, and it was like, I'm gonna have to start this over if I don't fix this, I would try to fill it. And I have some putty, but I don't have a lot of faith that the putty's gonna stay in the hole. So I would prefer just to work around it, and when I teach people, I'm like, don't worry about it, just look at it as a happy accident. How can you turn something strange like that into a positive thing? So I'm gonna, I don't know if Amanda can see, or Miranda, I'm sorry. I'm gonna spread a little ink out here. When you do, I'm gonna do just a little hand printing. Just so you can see that hand print, there are a lot of printmakers out there that's all they ever do, and they do beautiful work. I'm not one of them. I can do a couple, but it's difficult for my wrist over time. I don't like to repetitively do stuff like that, and I'm just going to use cardstock too on this. Actually, no, I'm not. With presses, you can get away with heavier paper, and I like heavier cotton papers to use. We're not going to get into all of that right now, but for, that's a lot of line. Anyway, first you always have a knife with you, and you flatten the ink down before you get the brayer out and start rolling it, because otherwise you'll have a big glob that you're fighting to get even. So this doesn't change regardless of whether you're doing, hear it? Can you hear it? You've got to spread it out. When you first start out, it's really sparkly, and I don't like the word sweaty, but sweaty is a good word. You don't want it stringy, or, you just don't want too much ink. Let's see. I think I'm going to use the same plate for both, because it's easier to compare the two for you to see it that way. So using this plate that I've picked up a couple of times already, just to show you. This is a 3/8 inch. I'm probably going to have to calibrate the press after I do that, but when you apply ink to do hand printing, you actually have to use a little more ink, because it just needs to pick it up. And whereas the press is squishing the smithereens out of it, so it's going to pick up a whole lot more ink. Okay, so probably should have flattened this out beforehand, but I'm just going to set this down. Kind of rub it down with your hand so it's less likely to want to curl up on you. And this is a little barren. It has little bumps on it that just catch, and you make a circular motion, and you just want to make sure you get everything. You can get some really nice soft effects with hand printing. And you can with the press too. You have to be really mindful of the pressure that you're using with the press. And you might just purposely leave a lot less ink on the plate if you want a soft effect on the press. And a lot of times, the second pressing, when you don't put any more ink on a plate, it's called a ghost print. And we use that a lot. We really like the effect of the plate, the print coming out when it hasn't had any new ink on it. Sometimes it's prettier than the one, sometimes it can be a little too harsh if it's just black ink. Okay, now I don't know, kind of scooting around all over the place here.
That's nice.
So, yeah.
Wow.
But what you won't see, and I can't let you feel because you'll get all inked up, but what you can see a little bit of those little lines coming through there. But you will not feel an emboss like you would when I put it through the press. You just won't. It's just not possible because you're not putting any pressure, not that kind of pressure. So. Probably gonna need to come up here a little bit. This was my first press, and it's a fantastic little press for workshops. I can barely carry it now. I think when I first got it, I was strong enough to carry it. Now I have to depend on loved ones to carry it. So, I'm not quite sure I've got it right now. What I'm doing right now is it didn't put any more ink on it, so I'm gonna let you see it. Now, this is provided I have gotten it. Okay. The presses in studio have calibration, and you can just get them right where you want them. With this one, it's what if I was paying better attention, I would have done dry fitted for them to make sure it's just right. That's why the rubber's under there, so the whole thing doesn't move on me. Alright, now what I'm thinking now is that maybe I got a little too much pressure on. Okay, it's light, but see the emboss? You can see that from here. I'm gonna do one more plate, a different plate. I've got this. This is an old favorite of mine. I just brought it with me. I'm not sure why. Now, I don't guarantee that I've got my ink perfectly done here, but since that was a little on the thick side, I thought, well, I'll try. You want to feel resistance, but you don't want to like hurt yourself for the press. That's never good. Yeah. I like the one in the studio. We use a Conrad 18 a lot in the studio, and I love that way it goes. Every time it goes back and forth, the weight goes over. Okay, not a fabulous print, but whoopsie. Okay. It's much thinner plate to start with. Okay. You want to see anything else? Any more questions?
Can you hold up the one you did handmade versus the one you did printed together?
Now, remember, I didn't add more ink, so had I added more ink, you know, they don't look all that different, do they?
Why'd you choose different papers for the two?
Because I thought I'd get a better hand printing with this, but
Oh, because it's
I can
thinner?
certainly, do another.
No, I was just wondering if the thinner paper is easier.
Well-
is it easier to get the ink on the thinner paper with the?
It is for hand printing.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the thing about, if you if you use this paper on the press, you have to use a cover sheet, or that
Will
ink's
it
gonna
rip
come. No, but the ink will come right through that and go right onto your, things, onto your felts, which all of our felts in the studio have ink all over them. They just have to dry. So, any more questions? Anybody wanna see any of the, this is a plate that I just carved, it's, just a piece of basswood, excuse me. And, I carved it just accentuating, playing around with the idea of grain, and then I made, a few prints using that, just by making monoprints with that, and I just like that accentuated texture there. I think probably about there, Mariah. You wanna see the plate? It's really pretty. I feel like I ought to come back and do one with full black on here so you can get a really good one. You're supposed to say, that was a sucky print, why don't you do a better one?
I thought it was pretty good.
You know what's funny is I can do a whole edition, and then like a couple of the fuzzy ones, people go, that's the one, I really like that one. You know, it's like, oh, okay. So there's no accounting. And sometimes people just like the ones that are a little more obvious, the imperfections are a little more, you know, it's a little more, whatever, fuzzier. Okay. How about I do that? I'll do that on the, this paper, and I'll use that paper for a cover sheet. Yeah. Think that's a good idea?
I'm not an artist.
Ugh. Mary's not an artist, but she picks the best one of every edition. I'll say, hey Mary, what's the best one? Every time she picks it. But she's not, it's a skill. But it's fun in the studio when we're all printing stuff to get the other people, well, what do you think of this one? And, you know, a lot of times we're dead on, we're all looking at the same one, but then sometimes like, nah, I like that one better. So, you know. Here we go. May not be 100%. I've gotten spoiled by micrometers. I get micrometers and I have a little gauge that tells me what to set for each material, what to set it on, so probably should have spent a little more time with the press. Okay, here we go. That's a good print. Solid black. Okay. And you probably would feel a little bit, but there's just not, the body of the paper just can't really give you much of an emboss. Okay. I can't think of anything else to say. I've enjoyed talking to you, some of it. I've never been on camera. It if I'm a complete whatever, that I am what I am what I am, so.
You did a great job.
Yeah.
Yes.
You did a great job.
Thank you, Jennifer.
You've done this a million times.
Joining the hub forced me, like, I had to do the thing for my exhibit.
Right?
Ugh. You know, I had to do that, and then I did a one talk here, but I didn't have camera, I didn't do that, I just did my usual you know, but, what can I say? I'm done. Yay!
Good
All
job,
right.
good job.
Thank you.
Good